Welcome to the deep dive. So today we have this genuinely fascinating document on the docket. It's an excerpt simply titled Mark 217.pdf.
Yeah, it's a really interesting piece.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is basically to unpack how an ancient critique, like a literal first century critique of religious leaders,
Yeah.
actually perfectly diagnoses our very modern, 21st century obsession with wellness and wealth.
Right, that whole drive to be a self-made success.
Exactly. We are looking specifically at how the text breaks down the psychology of self-reliance. And to really get into this, I want you to think about the last time you were just sitting there, maybe on the couch, mindlessly scrolling on your phone.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. You're swiping past photos, news updates, endless videos, and then inevitably you hit the targeted ads.
Because that algorithm is, it's always working in the background. It's constantly trying to figure out exactly what will make you pause.
And think about what actually does make you stop scrolling. Maybe it's an ad promising better sleep or like a new system for a more organized life.
Or a masterclass on building passive income.
Yeah, exactly. Out of a sea of endless flashing content, that specific ad stood out to you. And the source material we are diving into today points out something really fundamental about human nature here.
Which is,
That ad caught your attention because it touched a vulnerability or, a need you actually felt.
right, it spoke to a gap in your life that
Yeah.
you're actively aware of. And the author of our source uses a really grounded analogy to explain this baseline human behavior.
Oh, the mechanic ones.
Yeah, the mechanic analogy. So imagine you are driving down the street and you pass this massive, brilliantly designed billboard for the best mechanic in town.
Oh.
If your car is running perfectly, like the engine is purring, there are no warning lights on the dashboard at all. You don't even register the ad.
You just drive right past it.
Exactly. You drive right past. The premise here is that, well, no one buys a cure if they don't believe they're sick.
Man, that concept, that basic law of supply and demand applied to our internal lives, that is our entry point today. Because the text argues that this exact logic is the foundation for one of the most striking statements Jesus ever made.
Right. From the biblical text of Mark 2.16.
Yeah. He says, I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. And, we often strip a statement like that of its psychological weight.
You read it as just an ancient religious jargon.
Exactly. But applying that mechanic analogy completely opens up the document's argument. It suggests he was addressing the fundamental reality of, well, who is actually in the market for a savior?
To understand why that statement acts as a sort of psychological diagnosis,
Yeah.
the document first takes us back to define who exactly thought they were, quote-unquote, healthy.
Right, and who was labeled as sick in the first century.
Right. So the setting is a dinner table in a really crowded house. Jesus is sitting down to eat, and around him are tax collectors and people publicly known as sinners.
Let's contextualize what a tax collector was in that specific culture, because the source makes it really clear this wasn't just some boring bureaucratic desk job.
Oh, far from it. In that society, tax collectors were viewed as greedy traitors. They actively collaborated with the occupying Roman government.
Wow.
Yeah, and they made their living by extorting their own people, so they were entirely compromised.
And the sinners at the table alongside them?
Those were individuals with such bad reputations that anyone in polite society actively avoided them. Like, these were the ultimate social and moral outcasts.
So you have this dinner party of total outcasts, and then you have the audience watching this happen.
The religious leaders of the time. The Pharisees.
Right. And according to the text, they are absolutely outraged by this scene. Because in their worldview, if you were a holy person, you stayed far, far away from those kinds of people.
Yeah, their religious resume, as the source outlines, was intense. They studied God's word constantly, memorized vast amounts of laws, and kept this remarkably strict lifestyle.
Okay, wait, I want to push back on that slightly, or at least clarify how the text presents them. Did the Pharisees actually walk around thinking they were, like, utterly flawless, immortal beings?
Or was it more insidious than that?
Yeah. Was it that they just treated their religious performance as, like, a lever they could pull to manage their own spiritual security?
The source suggests it's the latter, and that is their massive blind spot. They didn't necessarily think they lacked human flaws.
Right.
But they trusted their own system of goodness way more than they trusted anything else. So when they see Jesus peacefully eating with compromised people, they are deeply offended because it breaks their transactional model.
It breaks the rules of their ecosystem.
Exactly. Inside, the text points out, Their hearts were full of pride and self-righteousness. Their ultimate problem wasn't that they were too bad.
What was it?
The document argues their ultimate problem was that they thought they were good enough on their own.
Man, their problem was their perceived goodness. And that brings us to the climax of this historical scene. Jesus hears their whispering and their judgment, and he responds with that simple picture.
It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick.
Yeah. But before we move into the modern applications, I feel like we need to pause and define a term the source uses pretty heavily here.
Which one? Grace.
Yeah, grace, because the text argues that the Pharisees closed themselves off from grace. For anyone unfamiliar with how the author is using that word, what does it mean in this context?
It essentially means an unearned rescue. It's this radical idea that you don't have to fix yourself or optimize your life or, build a perfect resume before asking for help.
But there's a catch, right?
There is. To receive an unearned rescue, you have to admit you actually need rescuing.
Which is incredibly hard to do if your resume looks fantastic.
Oh, absolutely.
And this is where the deep dive gets really uncomfortable, because it is so easy for you and me to look back at those ancient Pharisees and just judge them.
We tell ourselves we aren't rigid or arrogant like that.
Exactly. We tell ourselves, well, we don't live in a society where strict religious rule following dictates who is deemed a successful person. But the document makes a hard pivot right here.
It does. It asks, how does this translate today?
Because the markers of being enough have definitely shifted, right?
Oh, yeah. The markers have shifted, but the underlying psychology hasn't budged an inch. Society today doesn't hand out status for memorizing ancient Levitical laws.
No, definitely not.
Instead, the text points out that we admire the rich. We admire the highly educated, the successful, the talented.
And perhaps most importantly, the cultural ideal is to be utterly strong and independent.
Right. We've essentially replaced memorizing ancient religious laws with building the perfect LinkedIn resume.
Or curating these highly optimized, totally self-reliant lifestyles. I mean, the software has been updated, but the core operating system remains exactly the same. We desperately want to feel that we don't need help.
And the author argues that this modern pursuit of being strong and independent is the exact same psychological trap that the Pharisees fell into.
It's our modern equivalent of self-righteousness.
Exactly. When we feel like we are enough on our own, whether through our wealth, our wellness routines, or our intellect, the text claims, we close ourselves off from the concept of grace.
We look the doctor right in the eye and insist we aren't sick.
Precisely.
I really want to spend the rest of our time digging into the how and why of this, because the source text outlines 4 specific pillars of modern life where this self-reliance really takes root.
Right. It breaks down into the physical, the relational, the psychological, and the intellectual and financial.
Let's look at the physical pillar first. The text describes someone who, eats healthy, exercises, and sleeps well. They feel strong and in total control of their body.
The mechanism at play here is just fascinating. I mean, we live in an era entirely dominated by the optimization of the human body.
Oh, totally.
We track our sleep cycles with wearables, we count our macros, we take cold plunges, we monitor our blood sugar spikes. And on the surface, that is just taking care of your biology.
Right.
But the text highlights this subtle psychological shift that happens when you achieve mastery over your physical state.
It creates an illusion of invincibility.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You start to feel like the master of your own fate simply because your resting heart rate is optimal.
That's wild.
The subconscious thought the text points out isn't just I'm healthy. It morphs into I am the author of my own vitality. I don't need to rely on anything outside of my own discipline.
Wow. You build a physiological fortress, and inside it, you feel untouched by mortality.
Exactly.
But it's not just our bodies we try to bubble wrap, right? We do the exact same thing with our social circles, which brings us to the relational pillar.
Yeah, the text talks about having a good family, close friends, and really strong people skills.
Like you navigate social dynamics smoothly.
And this one is particularly insidious because, well, strong relationships are universally recognized as a core component of a good life.
Sure, nobody's saying friends are bad.
Right. But the document explores how we use relationships as a buffer. If you have a supportive partner, an incredible group of friends, and the charisma to talk your way out of conflict,
You insulate yourself from the friction of life.
you manage your PR so well that you never actually experience the raw, desperate need for forgiveness or intervention.
You essentially create an echo chamber of support.
And within that highly functional social bubble, you feel deeply secure. But the author argues that this security can easily mask the deeper existential vulnerabilities we all possess.
Because we start to believe that our curated network is enough to save us from the brokenness of the world.
Exactly.
Which transitions perfectly into how we take that curation inward. Because the third pillar is the psychological, and I mean, this might be the most prominent religion in our current culture.
But without a doubt.
The text talks about reading self-help books, practicing mindfulness, going to therapy, and managing stress.
We are living in the golden age of psychological self-awareness. We have terminology for everything now.
Right, gaslighting, toxic, all of it.
We know how to set boundaries, we know how to practice mindfulness, we have strategies for emotional regulation. But the text examines how this incredibly robust toolkit can inadvertently become a new form of self-salvation.
Okay, wait a second. Let me just jump in here and play devil's advocate for the listener.
Sure, go ahead.
Are we really supposed to walk away thinking that going to therapy, learning to manage our anxiety, or, setting healthy boundaries are actually bad things? Because abandoning all of that sounds like a recipe for a completely chaotic, dysregulated life.
No, and that is a crucial distinction. The source material draws a very, very clear line here so as not to be misunderstood.
Okay, good.
The text explicitly states that none of these things are bad by themselves. Health, wisdom, good relationships, and hard work are all labeled as good gifts.
So the author is not demonizing therapy or responsibility.
Not at all.
So where does the text say the danger actually lies then?
The nuance is entirely in the effect these things have on our internal posture. The danger arises when these good gifts quietly convince us that we are completely capable of handling the human condition on our own.
Oh, I see.
With the psychological pillar, the trap is the belief that if you just do enough inner work, you can completely self-regulate your way out of needing grace.
You substitute self-awareness for salvation.
Exactly. It's that subtle moment when you whisper to yourself, I've got this.
I've got this. Man, that's the modern Pharisee's mantra.
It really is.
And that bulletproof feeling extends right into the fourth pillar, the intellectual and financial. The text describes having a solid education, a progressing career, savings, and solid plans for the future.
Just consider the mechanism of financial security for a second. If you have a degree from a prestigious school, a high-paying career, and a padded 401k, you have built a literal mathematical buffer against the unpredictability of life. Money acts as an incredible shield. It buys distance from consequence, from discomfort, and from emergency.
It's the ultimate American dream. Society looks at that financial and intellectual fortress and just says, you have arrived.
But the document argues that this fortress tricks the brain. When you can buy your way out of most daily crises, you start to believe you are immune to the chaos of the human experience.
Your bank account and your degrees basically become the resume you hold up to the universe to prove you are enough.
Exactly.
It's so interesting to view all four of these pillars, the physical, relational, psychological, and financial, through the lens of that ancient dinner party.
It changes everything.
The text is making a really bold claim here. It argues that when we successfully optimize all these areas of our lives, our hearts actually close off to the concept of unearned rescue.
Because we mistake our well-curated lives for actual spiritual health. We are treating the symptoms, our bank accounts, our resting heart rate, our stress levels, and ignoring the underlying condition of human frailty.
We think we're cured.
The author essentially says, we think we've cured the disease simply because the outward symptoms look highly successful and manageable.
And that brings us all the way back to why Jesus' statement to the religious elite was just so disruptive. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners.
Right.
The text suggests that his unearned rescue is only accessible to those who actually recognize they own bankruptcy. If you were standing there clutching your resume of health, wealth, emotional intelligence, and financial independence,
your hands are quite literally too full to receive what is being offered.
wow.
The text leaves us with a rather haunting visual here. If we fall into this modern trap of optimization, we end up exactly like those first-century Pharisees.
Standing on the sidelines.
Standing on the sidelines, deeply offended by the messiness of grace, holding on to our achievements, and completely missing the invitation because we refused to admit we were sick.
It really forces a massive reevaluation of what we typically consider a blessing or a success. I mean, we spend all our energy trying to build these four pillars to protect ourselves.
Yeah, we do.
But if the author is right, if our modern operating system of wellness and wealth has this dangerous tendency to blind us to our own deep needs, it completely shifts our perspective on the difficult, unoptimized parts of life.
It does. And it leaves us with a concluding thought that pushes beyond just understanding the text,
Sure.
challenging how we view our own lives.
What's that?
Well, if success and self-sufficiency build a fortress that keeps grace out, we have to ask about the inverse.
What happens when the fortress cracks?
Exactly. Could it be that our hardest moments, like a massive financial failure, a painful relational breakdown, a health crisis, or those moments of deep psychological burnout,
Yeah.
could it be that those are actually the very mechanisms that clear our vision?
Because they strip away the illusion that we are in control.
The text implies that as long as our modern operating system is running without any glitches, we never bother to check the core code. We just keep functioning.
Right, we just keep scrolling.
It's only when the system completely crashes, when our optimization fails, and we realize we cannot fix the programming ourselves, that we finally become capable of asking a master programmer for help.
So perhaps the moments when we can no longer whisper, "I've got this," aren't actually the end of the world?
They might be the beginning.
According to the logic of this ancient text, the moment your modern fortress collapses might just be the exact moment you finally become capable of receiving grace.